Good morning, everybody. Got your coffee? I got my coffee. So today's video is literally, because I wasn't going to do a video today, but then Garrett sent me a donation. And so I said, I'm going to have to do a video because I have to thank Garrett. So I think that's how I'm going to start phrasing this from here on out. Because there were times when I didn't want to do a video, but then someone would send a nice donation my way. And I feel compelled to thank them for that because, you don't have to do that. And so if I'm going to do a video thanking them, then I need to put out content, and so that's how you all get a lot of this content. It's because people like Garrett have sponsored that video. And so here we are. Got your coffee? Now, when I say buy me a cup of coffee, we use the K-Cups pods, but I tell you, those things are so expensive, are they not? Y'all really do be buying me a good cup of coffee. Y'all do. I mean, they got the cheaper ones like the Kroger brand and, but those good ones, like New England brand, they're pricey. And so I thank you. But anyway, okay, let's get to it. A few years ago, maybe about 6 years ago, it would have been about the third year in a row that our landlord raised our rent. After initially saying that first year way back, I have no intention on raising the rent. I have no interest, that's what he said, in raising the rent on good tenants, because I asked him, was he going to raise the rent when we signed the lease? He told us no, and he didn't that year. But the following year he did, the year after that he did, and on that third year I was ready. I said, if he raises the rent, I'm going to move. Every time he raised the rent, we'd have the conversation. He'd say, fair market value, and I'm like, fair market, like, what the fuck is that? So I started researching to find out what that was exactly and what that entailed. So as I was looking for rentals, just to have them on the background, in case he raised the rent again, I noticed that the $850 that he was charging us per month was actually a steal for that house in that neighborhood. So actually it was below fair market. I just hadn't realized what was going on with the rents. And so because I'm a bit of a nerd, I'm a great researcher, and I'm really good at following trends and patterns. That's one of the things that have kept me very safe from making a lot of bad financial decisions. And I'll say, obviously, in my middle-aged years, once I got my shit together. And I told my husband, I said, this is not looking too good. If rents keep trending like this in the next 20 years, we're not going to be able to afford rent. Now, mind you, this was about 6-7 years ago. Okay. One of the reasons we moved from Michigan to South Carolina is because South Carolina was a whole lot less expensive and we were tired of the snow. Now, fast forward just a few more years and the pandemic happened, right? And we're in South Carolina, and by this time we have bought our house and we might have just got into it. We're in year 1 of owning this house. And so because I am someone that I really do put my money where my mouth is, I like to know what's going on in my community. I'm not the kind of person that's going to mind my next door neighbor's business, mind you. But I'm definitely the kind of person that's going to attend meetings, so that I know what the needs are in my community, because, I actually give a shit about that. And I want to make sure that Black people have what Black people need. So with that said, I noticed that the rents were starting to become a problem here, even though they were a lot cheaper here. But then you got to keep in mind that here in the South, people get paid less per hour. But it kept trending upward and upward and upward. And I would put these videos out talking about the rent, and not a lot of people paid me very much attention. Not on social media. Now, fast forward another 4 years or so, and it's all anybody can talk about is how high the rent is. I promise you I have a point. when I was having the discussion about Black people in our community suffering from these high rents, and when I tried to start those conversations, I got to keep it real with you. Black people didn't care. They didn't give a fuck about what our community, people in our community was going through. And I did a video a few months ago about this computer software company called RealPage. Now, RealPage is the computer software company that American landlords, particularly corporate landlords like Cortland Apartments, you know, those people that own all those apartments, they use this computer software basically to scam Americans out of millions in the form of high rents, creating false rent inflation. Well, I talked about how the DOJ did this investigation. And so everybody, of course, and then the video did really well because everybody's complaining about the high rents now. People are actually giving a fuck because it's happening to them now. And so now they care. They didn't care when it was the people across the street or people around the way or the people on the next block over or the people over here in, you know, that subdivision. Nobody cared. But true to Americans, to the American way, and our this individualistic way where we only care about ourselves. We only care when we are being directly affected or when someone we love is being directly affected. So maybe you're a parent that wanted to help your kid look for an apartment and you realize that a 1-bedroom apartment is going for 16, 17, 1800 bucks. And you're like, no way my kid can afford this. They can't get the fuck out of my house and I want them out of my house. And you realize you're not going to get your house because your kid can't afford to move. So now everybody gives a fuck all of a sudden. So, well, I talked about that. And then yesterday, it just so happened, you know, everybody's talk is occupied right now with the election. And so this almost slipped past me. And I had an update and I did an update. Same thing that happened with that first video where I talked about RealPage and the DOJ is starting to happen with that video I did yesterday over on TikTok. Well, now that the Department of Justice have wrapped up their 2-year investigation, now I told people in that video, you can go back and look at it. It's entitled, It's a Scam, Part 1. Part 2 went up yesterday. I talked about, well, the DOJ did the investigation. So that means that the evidence is there. People can file suit now. You know, Americans, you know, we really need to invest in education because, you know, the way people are not prompted to just think, and they want you to give them every little fucking answer, and nobody has the right to do that. When I asked the question in part 3, what did you do when it wasn't you but other people in your community that was suffering from these high ass rents? What did you do? Did you give a fuck or not? Did you do anything to make anything easier for one single person in your community that was suffering from unaffordable rent? No, you didn't. No, you didn't. And so it's not just the DOJ. It's not just RealPage. It's not just the American government. It's not just American greed, but it's the American people who look the other way when we see others suffering. That's another reason why. And we have to own that too. That's the reason why we're, you know, people who rent are in this fix. Because you didn't give a fuck when it was happening to the next person. And now that it's you, you got all these questions that need immediate answers. And I mean, y'all should go over there if you haven't seen that video. A lot of those responses I did delete because just some people are not smart enough to be in this very nuanced conversation. Because again, it's me. And they can't think through the steps. First steps, it's a process. That's the first thing that people aren't understanding. It's a process. Meaning the DOJ did the investigation. And in that first video, everybody said nothing was going to happen. I said, you know, I don't think that that's what's going to happen. Because the reason why the DOJ did the investigation in the first place, and it wasn't because people in my community couldn't afford their rent. It was because white people had to start choosing between rent and medication and rent and food. It wasn't because black people were suffering. Black people have always had this issue. But when white people started crying and the white tears got to flowing, then that was when the DOJ was like, I don't know. We need to start talking about this, doing something about this. Now that investigation has wrapped up, remember, I said in that first video, lawsuits can happen now. Well, 4 days ago, the DOJ filed a lawsuit against RealPage. Not only did they do it, but the Arizona Attorney General did as well, come to find out. Now, I forget what her name is. I want to say Lisa Hayes, but I don't think that's right. But anyway, you can Google that. And but I do know that she's a Dem. And so while we're talking about voting and people saying that voting doesn't matter, I guess it does, huh? Because this is Biden's DOJ. He is the one who appointed the person who launched this investigation. The Democratic governor in Arizona, who is also filing suit against this company because she is known for being a politician of the people. She's doing what she can to get these rents down in her state. And that is why she is filing suit. See, it's a process. It didn't happen overnight, and it's not going to be fixed overnight. And so now that people are suffering, and it's them too, they want an immediate fix. And they're talking to me like I'm the one that raised their rent, and I'm not the one that raised your fucking rent. I didn't raise your rent. Now, don't get me wrong. I sympathize. I empathize. I do. I don't pay rent. I pay a mortgage. My mortgage isn't that high. This isn't something that I have to actually give a single fuck about. I don't have to care about it. But because I'm someone that's got common sense, I know that problems tend to snowball. And what happens in one community eventually happens in the next community. That's always been the way, hasn't it? The crack epidemic, the opioid epidemic. Black schools not being fully funded. Now America's not funding education. To the point where we've got all these stupid people asking me a million questions that they could probably just fucking Google. But they're not prompted to think because critical thinking skills are lacking. Which is why people can't understand the nuance that is happening with this issue. It won't happen overnight. There are people in those comments that are saying, yeah, I noticed where I'm at, the rents have started to stabilize and come down. It's a process. And mind you, again, because people only care about themselves, they are not listening to the people who are saying, we are starting to experience a little relief where I'm at. Eventually, a precedent has been set. A legal precedent has been set. The Department of Justice sued RealPage, who colluded with American landlords to falsely inflate rents. So that means that someone eventually is going to be charged and someone was going to get sued. And then when the first lawsuits started happening, other lawsuits, the Attorney General of Arizona, voting does matter. That's a local state election. Local state election. See what happens when we vote the right people in? See what happens? Voting does matter. It does matter who you put into positions of power. Because look at what she's doing for her people. Now, other people, probably governors in blue states will probably join this suit. And people who have been scammed out of thousands upon thousands upon thousands of rent can now file suit. It's class action. People are asking questions, and I would think that the answers would be obvious, but I guess the answer isn't obvious for a lot of people. It won't happen overnight, but we do know that the rents are stabilizing. And what I mean by stabilizing is that they're not continuing to increase. It's not saying that your rent hasn't increased. Mind you, let's think about the collective and not you only as an individual, which again is a part of the fucking problem. That's a part of the problem. But people are reporting that the rents are coming down. Someone even said that their apartments where they live were starting to do rent specials again. Now that RealPage has been sued and this problem is being addressed and a precedent has been set and the inflated prices can't keep happening, what will happen as a consequence of that is that landlords will now have to compete again. And all these apartment buildings that people are seeing being built, I live in South Carolina. They're building tons of new apartments here in South Carolina in the area where I live. So people will have to compete again for tenants. And, you know, people, I don't know. It's just they can't get there on their own. And again, it's just me. And I thought people who were following me were starting to understand. But I get it. That when you talk about something that everyone, a lot of people at one time is being affected by, it's going to drive a lot of new people to your page. And it's going to drive a lot of people to your page that do not necessarily have the intellect to keep up with, you know, conversations that are more nuanced, like rent inflation, you know, fake rent inflation and DOJ investigations and, you know, class action lawsuits. And, you know, it's going to be hard to keep up. But a lot of that stuff is Google. You can Google. It's Googleable, as I like to say. And the thing of it is about Google is it resides on the same internet as TikTok and YouTube. You know, it's like right there. It's easy to access. One lady asked me, she said, well, is RealPage still in business? And I said, that, you know, that's probably something you can just Google, you know, because you should be able, I mean, I don't know, you should just be prompted to look up information on your own. You know, these people, I wouldn't trust people on the internet to inform me and educate me. I mean, you know, pass the information along, sure. But I'm that person. I use Google so many times a day because I'm always going to fact check. You should fact check what I'm saying right now. I get that there have been people who have been following me for a long time and they know that my information is pretty accurate. But there's been times when my information has either been outdated or not completely accurate. And I try to make sure that that doesn't happen very often, but it has happened, you know, once or twice in these years. But let me tell you, I know I'm rambling, but it's just, I mean, like, you don't want to call, you know, I'm rambling because you don't want to call people stupid, but God, can you just sit with it a bit? I mean, I get it. You're struggling. But the point is, you're not the only person who's struggling. You're not the only person who's struggling in this moment. You're not the only person who can't afford your rent in this moment. There are people who are in dire straits than you are. I get that you are barely holding on and you're tired of trying to make these ends meet. But there are people who literally lost their apartments as a result of this. Excuse me. They lost their apartments. They lost their homes. They had to move in cars. People, listen, people died because they had to ration their insulin, trying to keep a roof over their heads. There's somebody always more fucked up than you are, worse off than you are. And again, the American way is me. And it frustrates me and it angers me to no end. Because part of the reason why, excuse me, I need some water, not coffee. Part of the reason why RealPage and corporate America and greedy politicians were able to get away with this was because Americans were so complicit. But that video didn't do real well because people know I'm telling the truth about that, and they don't want to own the truth of it. Excuse me. That we as an American don't care about other Americans, and that this problem, the reason why it got so big, is because nobody cared until it was them. And that's just the truth. Nobody cared until it was them, and that's the way of the world, particularly here in America. But know that, excuse me, as a result of this investigation, some people are starting to experience some relief, and eventually you will too. I'm sorry I did so much coughing, but I'm an asthmatic, and when I get very emotional, my asthma tends to act up, and one of the ways it does that is with coughing. So you might notice that from me from time to time. And right now I'm very emotional because I'm sad and I'm angry and I'm frustrated all at the same time, because I get so frustrated with people. You know, they say voting doesn't matter, but clearly it does. Otherwise, why do you think as a black person, these white people keep redrawing the maps and keep trying to steal your votes, and why they keep purging people from the voting rolls? Voting matters. Do you honestly think your ancestors died for your right to vote just to die? Voting matters. It matters. It matters who we put in positions of power, especially when people, regular schmegular people, are suffering. Americans can't even live a quality life because they are trying to pay these outrageous rents. And I get it. People are desperate. There are people who haven't paid their rent this month or last month. There are people who are on the verge of being evicted. I get it. I get it. And I wish that there was more that I could do for you. I wish I had better news for you. I wish I had more helpful information for you. I wish I could do something for everybody. I do. But all I can do is to give you the information that I have and to let you know that things are turning around slowly. But it wouldn't be this slow if we voted in every election, every time, and put the right people in those positions. This is RealPage's fault. This is America's fault. And it is the fault of the American people. So before we start complaining about how much we are suffering, ask yourselves, what did you do when you saw the suffering of others? Y'all have a good day. If you'd like to support my platform, my Venmo, sponsor the next video, my Venmo and my Cash App will be down in the comments. Y'all have a good day.